Hey everybody, Steve Stine here from Guitar Zoom as well as the Steve Stine Guitar Podcast. And today we're going to be talking to an amazing guitar player, amazing guy, Luca Vincenzetti. And Luca is now part of the Guitar Zoom family. He's one of the academy instructors here at Guitar Zoom. How you doing, buddy?
Hey, Steve. Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here on your podcast. And yeah, I'm doing great. It's been awesome working with you for the past almost 3 years now. So,
Yeah, it's been a long time.
yeah, it's amazing how time flies. But yeah, super excited to be part of this great team. And yeah, definitely really happy.
That's awesome. So where are you located? Where are you at right now?
Well, right now, I'm in a small town called Merida. It's in Venezuela,
Okay.
South America. So originally, I was born in Italy, and my family moved here when I was just a kid. You know, I was
Okay.
about as a 10 or 11 years old, and we moved to the capital, which is Caracas, basically. So that's where I grew up, and that's where I started playing guitar, basically. And I studied, music over there, and yeah, I moved to Merida, which is, as I was saying, a small town, about 6 or 7 years ago.
Okay.
So that's where I'm located right now.
How far is that from where you grew up then?
Well, that's about it's quite a ride. It's like by bus, it's like 12 hours.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's about 900 kilometers away.
Cool.
Yeah,
Okay, well, tell me what I'd love to know before we get into all this other stuff is growing up. Of course, I was born in the States.
sure.
Growing up where you grew up, how did you first get introduced to music? Like, what was before we even get to guitar? Like, what's your earliest, memories of being intrigued by music itself? Any people or music or whatever it might have been.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, my kind of earliest memory goes back to when I was around 9 or 10 years old, basically, and we were still living in Italy, right?
Okay.
So I had a friend who was like 3 or 4 years older than me, and he had a drum set in his house, right?
Okay.
So
Yeah.
when we hanged around, he would sit in his drum set and start playing some stuff, and basically, what the guy was playing didn't make much sense to me at all. It was like the guy was just banging on the drums and stuff. But then a couple of days later, he had a rehearsal with his band, and he started playing the same rhythm thing that he was doing when he was alone, and suddenly everything fell into place. What he was playing that at the beginning didn't make any sense at all just sounded amazing, with the other guys playing. So there was always kind of like a magical component, in music for me from
Right.
that very first time. And um, again, when I was just a kid, and I don't remember really. My mom is the one who tells me. There used to be some music shows on the TV in Italy, right? Kind of like Saturday Night Live stuff.
Sure.
And she tells me that I used to have this little toy guitar, and I would just kind of pick it up and jump on the chairs and start mimicking whatever I was listening to on the TV.
Right.
So yeah, even though my family is not very much like musical inclined, my sister started playing piano, and she's 2 years younger than me. She started playing piano when she was around 7 or 8. So there
Okay.
was a piano in the house, and there was music on the TV. There was music on the radio. So yeah, I was always attracted to music from like a really early age. I didn't start playing till I was like 13 or 14, actually, when we actually moved to Venezuela. And the other interesting thing is that uh, when I was in Italy, I was studying in an American school.
Okay.
So yeah, so that's where I basically learned how to speak English. So when we moved to Venezuela, I didn't know how to speak Spanish, so I kept on going to American schools here in Venezuela as well. And the music that the guys, like my roommates, my classmates, were listening to was completely different to what was going on in like Venezuelan schools. So here there is a lot of influence from Latin music, obviously,
Sure.
but in American school, we used to listen to rock, you know, so that's what really attracted me at first to to guitar itself, basically.
Was rock music?
Yeah, absolutely. It was rock music. I like AC/DC and Van Halen and Deep Purple, Ozzy Osbourne. I was
Right.
into hard rock, man.
Sure.
But I also liked a lot of blues, like Eric Clapton, and maybe you know still rock, but maybe I would say a bit more melodic type of rock, kind of like Pink Floyd
Sure.
and Journey. So yeah, put the Police also was a big influence at me at first.
Sure.
So yeah, that's basically what I was listening to rock even before I started playing guitar. Basically,
Right.
that's what really attracted me to
So,
guitar itself.
sure. So when you started playing guitar, then do you remember what your first guitar was?
Yeah, and that's kind of like a funny story because I used to have long hair, when I was like 13 or 14. And my father, he wasn't really into that very much. He didn't like my look. So, walking from school back to the house, there was this really nice music store, and they had Gibsons and Fenders and all sorts of guitars, and I was really interested into that. So I was like, "Hey, Dad, check out this guitar," and so on. What do you think? So he was like, "Okay, let's make a deal.
Oh,
If you get a haircut, I'll buy you the guitar." So I actually traded my first guitar for a haircut, and I think I made a pretty good deal because it was a great Fender Strat, you
oh,
know.
great.
So yeah, it was an awesome guitar. So yeah, that was like my first guitar, and the way I got to the guitar was kind of like that. Funny story, a deal I made with my father.
Yep. So when you got your guitar, then did you start taking guitar lessons, or what did you do?
Well, there was a guy in high school that played guitar. He was awesome. At least I thought he played great.
Sure.
So we got together for a couple of sessions, and he taught me the very first thing that I think we all learn, which is basically the A minor pentatonic scale
Sure.
and like the 12-bar blues progression. So I started, yeah, just messing around with that and trying to figure out songs by ear, like Smoke on the Water by Deep Purple, kind of like the first songs I think we all learn,
Sure.
like the intro to Stairway to Heaven by Led Zeppelin,
Right.
and maybe a couple of intros to black AC/DC songs like Back in Black and that kind of stuff. And trying to figure out songs on my own. I remember the very first solo I tried to figure out. It was a song by Deep Purple called "When a Blind Man Cries." So Richie Blackmore solo, and that really blew my mind. Being able to figure out those first notes and making the guitar, getting some sounds out of the guitar. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that was kind of like my very first approach. So I only took a couple of lessons with this friend of mine, and then yeah, I started maybe jamming with some friends and maybe making up music of our own, composing some stuff with like the very rudimentary knowledge we have at first.
Sure.
But I was really into like composing music from the beginning, and eventually, way later on, I studied composition. After I went through music school, and yeah, so at first was really kind of informal training. Really, I,
Mm-hmm.
I I didn't start to study music like seriously speaking on a college level after high school. After I graduated from high school. And in the meantime, I started to listen to other types of music as well. I think like music learning is just an ongoing process. It's something that uh, it evolves over the years.
Mm-hmm.
Just like maybe what type of pick we use or what kind of strings we like on the guitar. We just change over the years. So I started listening to some still rock. It was still rock, but it was a bit more complex rhythmically and harmonically. It had maybe more interesting sounds. So I really got into listening to Rush, the band from Canada.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I joined a couple of friends and we started playing basically Rush songs, like Tom Sawyer, Limelight, all of those tunes, Red Barchetta,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, that was kind of like my introduction to maybe a bit more complicated music, and eventually I started listening to some jazz rock, Alan Halsworth, for example. Not that I ever was able to play anything by Alan
No,
Hall.
sure, but yeah, I mean, of course the transition makes sense, and I think that like what you just said is really really important is that you start off a certain way, and then as you grow to enjoy the instrument itself more, sometimes it makes you want to search out different kinds of music. Where when you're a kid, it's more about, like, for me anyway, it was more about the energy, and I still love all that kind of stuff. But
Absolutely.
there becomes an element of wanting more interesting things to do with the instrument itself, and
Definitely.
because for me it was the same thing. Like I
Yeah.
started off, very much with the same kinds of bands. I don't even know if I think I'm a little older than you. I'm not sure, but
I think we're more or less the same age. Well,
are
I'm
we?
I'm 54 right now,
Oh,
so
well, then we're the same age. So
well,
it's
here we
very
go.
similar. And I think with a lot of us that are this age, you did start off playing a lot by ear because how else could you do it? You had a buddy or, maybe a neighbor that could kind of show you a couple things here and there, but they weren't teachers necessarily. They were just trying to show you something. So,
Absolutely. Yeah, and the other thing is that kind of like in the 90s where I grew up in Caracas, there really weren't a lot of music schools that taught that kind of music.
sure.
There were basically classical conservatories. So if you wanted to study music, well, you had to study classical guitar, which I eventually did study a bit of that, and it helped me a ton, especially with the right hand technique. But I wasn't really into that. And
Right.
classical conservatories, you got to study for like 8 years or 10 years before you graduate. So, absolutely, the first contact we have with music is from buddies, from, yeah, like what we hear around maybe the radio. So, yeah, definitely. I think we come from a pretty similar background,
Right.
definitely. Yeah.
Where did the transition kind of occur that you decided to go to college and study music? Like, was there other things you had thought of doing, but then you were like, nope, this music thing is what I'm going to do.
Well, actually, yeah, I mean, I always really wanted to focus on music. There were, other stuff that you might be interested. Maybe you're good at math in high school, and so you might want to study engineering or something like that. But something happened at the like early '90s, maybe '95 or '96, that a new music school opened in Caracas. And so a couple of guys, they were husband and wife. They had studied in the States. She studied at Berklee College of Music, and her husband studied at MI in Los Angeles, right? So they opened up this music school, which was 100% focused on, popular music and, jazz and all. So it was an awesome opportunity. So I had started studying in college engineering, but as soon as this school opened up, it was like the perfect timing, the perfect moment. So yeah, I quit college and I went all in with studying music at this music school over there in Caracas. And also in that period of time, the scene in Caracas, there were a lot of cover bands playing in bars and restaurants.
Sure.
There wasn't a lot of jazz scene, and still there isn't very much, at least compared to the States or other countries. But there was a chance to play in cover bands and like playing top 40 songs and whatever was going on in the radio at that time. So I joined a couple of cover bands and I started working. So yeah, it was like perfect timing. The music school opened up, and these opportunities came up to play, and make some money playing music. So it was kind of like the perfect time, and that was when I definitely went all in with music, and I started studying seriously music, and practicing a lot, and playing around the music scene. um the thing was that after a couple of years, we get kind of tired and bored of playing the same kind of stuff over and over. And, it was really hard to find a good gig, because, uh, I mean, literally, there was like kind of 3 or 4 major acts going on here in Venezuela. They were all kind of like Latin pop, but we were like 200 guitar players,
Right.
So it was really hard to get into one of those gigs, because it was only like 3 or 4 guitar players who had all of those gigs.
Right.
So the other thing is that all of these 4 or 5 acts, they all kind of sounded the same, because it was kind of like the same type of music, the same musicians playing the same
Right.
stuff. So I really wasn't too much interested. Obviously, if I would have had an offer to play with those guys, I would have definitely taken it because of the experience, and the pay was great.
Right.
But musically speaking, I don't think it would have you know given me too much, as far as, yeah, again, apart from the great experience and playing other types of music. But I was also getting into jazz very much at that time. And since, there wasn't too many gigs around, and the opportunity to play jazz, I started to kind of like make up my own gigs by, getting together with a couple of friends, like minded, who also wanted to study that type of music. So we started studying jazz standards, from the real book, and you know, uh, trying to go around and finding some gigs that wanted that type of music. Maybe a restaurant which was more kind of like soft,
Yep.
and another type of scene.
Yep.
So that's actually something that really helped me, because, and it's something I always tell students and people who ask me, I don't have anybody to play with, it's hard for me to find a gig or something. So what I tell them is, make up your own gig, find like-minded people like you that want to play the same music, like the same music, and get together. Sometimes we have to kind of like be the leader, and move around and get the people together, and figure out the rehearsal times, and call the guys, we got rehearsal tomorrow, so you show up. So it kind of teaches you a lot about leadership as well.
Yeah. What you're, for those of you listening or watching, that's a really interesting thing, because when you first start playing, you're focused on playing. You're focused on elements of the guitar and learning to listen and hear and ear training or whatever it might be. But the performance aspect, the band aspect, the booking, the traveling,
Absolutely.
all of these other things is an entirely different world. And like you just said, like it's just so interesting how you can be on a track in your mind of what you want from the guitar, but there's always going to be some sort of a give and take in terms of what you're going to be able to do out in the real world with other human beings in terms of the music that you're playing or the time that you spend. I firmly believe that we spend 20 times more getting ready for a gig, traveling to a show, going on tour, whatever these things, relative to the pay that you actually get. Like, you have to love what you do
Absolutely.
so
And
much more than, yeah,
sorry to interrupt, even the actual playing,
yes. Yes. And so and in nowadays it's even worse. Like the money, it's like the amount of money that bands make never really went up
Right.
over the years, but the amount of time that you have to spend is still the same amount of time that you have to spend. So, it's just so important that you love what it is that you're doing. And for me, I've always been blessed to be able to also play, because I've played in a lot of bands and done a lot of different things like that, and developed really great friendships out of those, where I have a lot of friends that have played in musical situations where they've hated the musical situation, but they did it for the experience or for the money or whatever it might be. So again, I'm just saying it's just interesting because it's such a give and take of how much time you're willing to put in for a little bit of a little bit of compensation.
Right. And retribution.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah. So okay.
So,
So you're
so
doing
yeah.
this. You're doing the school thing. You're playing in bands. You started doing recordings. So with the recordings that you have, are they your compositions, or do you play on other people's stuff, or do you do both of those, or what do you do?
Well, that came a little bit later, actually, and just a small parenthesis, because there's something that you mentioned about, playing sometimes gigs that you really don't like the music, which I think it's super important. And I got a question a couple of weeks ago from a student asking me, okay, how can I make a living, playing music or being a musician? So the other thing that I started to do at that same time, a couple of years later, was teaching, right? So the great thing about teaching is that it can give you sort of like a steady income, right? And it allows you also to choose what gigs you want to play and what gigs maybe you're not so much interested in, right? So teaching has been basically, kind of like my go-to for the past 20 years, basically, right? So on the side, apart from having like a steady teaching job, you can, make up your own music. It gives you more freedom, basically, I think, to have a steady income as a teacher, and being able to choose the gigs that you really want to play.
Sure.
I always thought about taking gigs that would, teach me something musically speaking. For example, like playing in a quartet or a quintet is not as hard as playing in a trio or maybe in a solo setting, right? So eventually, after doing these gigs, I started doing other, gigs, playing, pop and rock, but in a duo situation, where the guitar is like the main instrument. So you're the only one there, and when you got to do a solo, you don't have anybody comping for you. So, you know, my point is basically that having kind of like a steady job as a teacher, maybe, teaching music, will allow you to, have more freedom on, the type of gigs that you want to take, and yeah, the type of music that you want to play.
You bet. Two things I'll add on that. Number one is the less people that there are in the band, the more money you can make. So if you're doing a solo gig, you can make more money as a solo gig than you can with a six-piece band, oftentimes. And the second thing I'll say is what you just said is absolutely true. Nowadays, you have to be diversified. Like, you can't just put all of your eggs in one basket, which is, I'm going to make money playing in a band. You look at bands. popular bands, relatively speaking, in their niche, that will still make software, or they'll make pedals, or they'll sell guitars under a particular brand that they're connected with. I have friends that do, like, they sell beats, or they do commercials, or, I mean, that's the thing is you have to be willing to do. There's got to be other things that so you can look at your talent and go, well, what else can I do with this talent? Because what I
Absolutely.
will say about teaching is that in order to be able to teach, at least from my perspective, you need to have the qualifications of being a halfway decent teacher. There are people that I know that are really great players that are not really great teachers.
Absolutely. It's a totally different thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think, teaching can be an avenue, no doubt about it, if that's something that you're qualified or you're good at being able to do. But there's so many things out there that you could do, from management. Like, I've got friends that in Minneapolis that's what they do, is they manage bands to come in and on tours and things like that, and they make supplemental income doing that. Or they own venues for people to play at,
Right.
or they own filming companies, right? So they do the filming, the audio production and video production. So the beautiful thing is that you're forced to think outside the box. It's not
Exactly.
just your talent on guitar that will do whatever. You've got to figure out what else you might be willing to do that you would still enjoy or tolerate, or whatever you want to call it,
Sure.
to be able to, so you're not sitting at a desk doing, economics or accounting, or whatever it might be.
Right.
And so, for anybody that's listening, you got to be thinking about that. Like, what other talents or what other byproducts can I have off of what it is that I'm doing? I think that's really important nowadays, because it's just really hard. You could talk to, again, it was always interesting to me, the reality of the people that I put on a pedestal as a kid, and I'm not naming names, but the 80s guitar icons that I was like, oh my God, these are the guys. And now they're doing Patreon, and they're doing whatever to try and stay in the game and make money and make a living, because
And make things. Yeah,
it's,
absolutely.
yeah, it's a tough. So be real about the situation. Don't just. The other thing is and I don't want to go on a tangent on this, but you never want to burn bridges, because you never know who you're going to need down the line to be able to connect again and make something real happen. And your phone doesn't ring because nobody knows who you are. Like, you've got to get out there and meet people and talk to people and develop connections and relationships. And I grew up in a very small town in the Midwest that nobody knows.
Sure.
And the only way to have done something that was beyond that was to get out, to start doing other things and making connections that were bigger than just like you living in a small town where there really isn't a scene.
Exactly.
You got to try and find a way of being able to break out of that.
Yeah, and do what you want to do. Find other alternatives.
Yeah,
And
that's right.
yeah, the thing that you mentioned about networking, I think it's super important. In fact, I've got a lot of friends who studied in music schools in the States. They went to college maybe at Berkeley, or whatever, New England Conservatory, or New School in New York, or whatever. And one of the things that they say is that, like, the thing that they learned or took more from being in college was the networking that they were doing.
The reason I went to college, I mean, I originally went to college to be a child psychologist, and then I
Okay.
wound up studying music. But my biggest takeaway were the connections.
Absolutely.
1,000,000%. one
Yeah.
million percent.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, the money you pay for the education, obviously, being in a music school, it's super important, I think, because, I mean, you get to play with a lot of people. You get to know the great teachers. You can learn 1,000 things, and it's kind of like a shortcut, because obviously you can learn things from listening to records. In fact, that was the way that everybody learned before music school even existed.
Sure.
you know.
Yeah,
But the networking and the connections is like what the thing that's going to stay with you your entire life, basically.
that's
So
right.
yeah, yeah.
Well,
So
so
yeah,
take that.
go,
Like, I always think about the like the underground metal band. Like, I have a lot of guys that took lessons from me that are now in bands and they travel around and do whatever. And their whole thing was learning how to write, getting a band together, and then immediately go to shows and start connecting with people and get on
right.
the road. Now, again, they're scraping by, right? It's not like they're making all of this money, but they're doing what they love to do. They're out there
Absolutely.
doing their thing, traveling around in a van or whatever it might be, and playing shows and going around the country or going around the world, and that all happens with making those connections, going to those shows, meeting people in the band, talking about stuff, giving them your music, whatever it might be. Back in the day, it was all based on like record companies and trying to appeal to the record
Exactly.
companies. Now you don't have to do that. Like, you can appeal right to the artists themselves. And I'm not talking about going and trying to meet Keith Richards from the Rolling Stones. I'm saying you're
Of
going to
course.
local shows that come through and you're meeting these people and you're connecting with them and saying, hey, this is my music, I'd love you to listen to this, whatever. And there's a great camaraderie with a lot of those kinds of bands where they're all working together and they'll take each other on a tour or whatever it might be. And again, you do this for the love of it and not so much because you think you're going to get rich off of it. um, because
Absolutely. I mean, that's one of the things that if you really want to do this for a living, you gotta love it.
that's
You
right.
really have to love it because and kind of like be open minded to maybe sometimes you're not gonna make that much money as if you were a doctor or a lawyer or
Right,
whatever,
right.
but it's something that I wouldn't trade for anything. But that's because we love this thing so
Yeah, that's
much.
right. Yeah, you're
Yeah.
absolutely right. So tell me
Yeah.
this. So how did I mean, because there's people that are just getting to know you. So how did you first get connected with Guitar Zoom
Yeah.
in the early days?
Well, actually, that was because of the pandemic, basically.
Okay,
Because when the COVID started, I was teaching in college here in the town where I live and playing, at local nightclubs and stuff, you know, jazz and maybe some Brazilian music, which I really got into as well because of where I live. Basically,
sure.
Venezuela has got a lot of influence from Brazil. But then when COVID came up, everything just stopped. There was no more teaching, there were no more gigs. So, I mean, yeah, I could stay here at my place and study and compose and make up music, but, I had to do something. It was kind of crazy. And, we all probably went through that. So I started doing some online work, So I got into, well, this page called Upwork and started, applying for jobs. And I started getting, crazy type of jobs, which kind of connects to what we were talking about before, about being able to do different things.
Sure.
So yeah, I got contacted with a guy who was doing transcriptions of old Persian music.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
Yeah, so he just needed the sheet music to be transcribed on a finale, basically digital notation,
Right.
right?
Right.
So I got that gig, and then there was this other girl who was doing a vocal coaching thing, and she wanted some vocal lines transcribed, like those runs, that like Christina Aguilera or those kind of singers do, like really bluesy and gospel stuff.
Right.
So I started doing some transcriptions with her, for this music vocal book that she was doing. Then I got contacted from some guys. Maybe he needed a jam track, and there was this guy in Australia who needed a jam track. So I made the jam track for him,
Right.
and a
Yeah,
whole
just
bunch of
odd jobs.
odd jobs,
Yeah.
absolutely. maybe a couple of guitar recordings from some guy in Norway or wherever.
Right.
And then I got an invitation, to do some transcriptions from this company called GuitarZoom. And they needed a transcriber, and I applied for the job, and that's basically the way I got contacted,
That's great.
through GuitarZoom. And it's kind of funny that this has been basically my job for the past 3 years. And one of the main challenges I went through when I was in music school was the ear training course. That was hard. It was difficult. And I had classmates that were super more talented than what I was, and some guys with perfect pitch who would just hear something and just figure it out, like on the fly, on the
Sure.
spot. So I really had to study hard, to pass that ear training course. And it's kind of ironical that after all the trouble I went through, my main job is basically transcribing,
Yeah.
which is 100% ear training based.
Right.
So, yeah, my advice is keep an open mind all the time, and
Yeah.
study, because you never know when you're going to get that opportunity.
That's right. I mean, it's so true. That's you have to be available. If you're
Yeah,
if you're never available, there's no way anything can happen. Wow, that's awesome.
yeah.
So, okay, so what do you like doing outside of music?
Well, I really like soccer,
Hmm.
football. That's kind of like my Italian roots, I think. So I play some soccer, and I got a motorcycle. I like riding around, and
Nice.
in the town where I live, it's in the mountains, so there's a lot of like tracks that you can go around. And yeah, that's doing some sports, playing soccer and riding around with my bike, basically. So yeah, that's kind of like my other side, apart from music.
Sure. So
Yeah.
do you get winter where you live?
Well, actually, no. We get basically like the dry season and the rainy season.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So right now we're in the rainy season, basically, but we still get some days in the sun. So yeah, we can ride around and
Oh, that's great. Okay, so
yeah,
I got one last question for you.
sure.
Who are some of your favorite, like name three of your favorite guitar players of all time?
Okay, well, I would start, way back. I would say Eric Clapton
Okay.
is one of them. And then there was a guy who super influenced me when I was studying in college, which is Pat Metheny.
Yeah.
And, it was Pat Metheny was an eye opener to me, not only because of the music, and it was kind of like the perfect balance between like musicality and virtuosity.
Sure.
Because he can play super fast lines, but at the same time he can play two notes that they just get to your heart.
Right.
And the other thing is that I was never very fast player. I
Right.
was never very good at, alternate picking. Like all the stuff that you do, I would love to do it, but I was never too good at it.
Sure.
So one of the things that Pat Metheny taught me was to find another way, because he plays a lot with legato and slides.
Mm-hmm.
So I started thinking, okay, so how would Pat Metheny study a major scale, basically,
Right.
without like attacking all the notes?
Right.
So studying Pat Metheny was something that really helped me to improve my technical skills, basically.
Right.
And going through, finding other routes apart from just alternate picking and like attacking all the notes, but studying other ways to do whatever it is that you want to accomplish.
You bet.
So yeah, Pat Metheny was a huge influence on me. And lately, there's an awesome guitar player. He's really young. He's called Julian Lage.
He's really good.
Yeah, yeah. And so I would say, like, from these three periods, I would probably say those three guys. And I mean, we could name
Yes.
tons of others,
Yes.
and not only guitar players, sax players and trumpet players, piano players. I love Keith Jarrett. I think he's one of the most awesome improvisers around.
Sure.
And that's something that I always recommend students, even if you're a guitarist, listen to other instruments as well.
That's right.
Transcribe, lines from sax players or pianos, or even, vibraphone. Gary Burton is another big name for me.
Right.
So yeah, keeping your mind open always is a big help, definitely.
Going back to what you just said, I there's two things. I was a Montessori instructor for about 14 years, if you know what Montessori education is. And
Sure.
the lady that owned the Montessori school was also the lead teacher. And she would always tell the kids, you need to find a way that works. So
Exactly.
in there's so many different ways I could go into that, but I was just thought that was a really great way of approaching it. And it reminds me of a George Lynch story where George is from Dokken, where he's talking about
Sure.
how, Dokken had this element of success, and then there were all these shredders that were really popular.
Right.
So he's going back and he's trying to learn how to alternate pick, and he's sucking at it because that's not what he does.
Exactly.
So he's trying to learn how to do this, and then he has this moment of clarity where he goes, I'm George Lynch. Like, why am I trying to do that when I do this? And I've always thought that was just a great, because it is the truth. I mean, there's no one way to eat a Reese's peanut butter cup. Like, you got to figure out the way that works for you in whatever way it is. There's no, like, people will
Yeah.
say, do you pick like they'll ask me, do you pick everything or do you legato? I'm like, to be honest, I don't do one or the other. They're always interacting with each other, and the less I think about it, the smoother everything sounds. Like, I don't really try and go in there and analyze exactly where the transition between legato and picking happens. I just allow it to be because it tends to sound smoother that way. But there's no this or that, and yeah, it's
Yeah.
interesting
Yeah.
that you say that.
Absolutely. And especially with our instrument, I mean, the guitar. I mean, there are some other instruments who have, like the piano, there's like a very specific technique, or saxophone, the way you get the sound out of the instrument.
Mm-hmm.
It's very specific. But I mean, how many guitar players are there that have, a specific picking technique?
Yeah.
I mean, there are probably as many picking techniques as guitar players are out there.
Yes. Well, I
You
think
know,
of, like, because this is a conversation that always comes up too, is people will talk about economy picking and they'll go,
right?
well, Frank Gambale does economy picking. Yes, of course he does. But it's not like he does an alternate pick. It's not like he doesn't know how to alternate pick. He knows how to do everything incredibly great. It's not like he doesn't do legato. He can do all of those things. So you always have to go, yes, it's true. He does do economy picking, but he does it when it's needed in his style of playing. It's not like, so
Yeah.
it's easy to take something out of context and forget that there's all these other things. Anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing is that we should, and that's another thing I always tell students is, believe in what you do.
Mhm.
Because, even if maybe, I wasn't such a fast player, but I kind of learned how to pick, nice notes that sounded good. And many times I got gigs because, of my melodic playing,
Mhm.
other than because of, somebody wanted a shredder or something. I'm kind of like not that guy. If you
Sure.
need shredding, go look for the guy who does that. But like being comfortable with what you play and the way that you play, and everybody has something to say, and you know one of the things that we do many times, especially at an early age, is comparing. Comparing. No, this guy's better than I am, or I would love to do that. So, like, be true to yourself. That's one of the main advices I could give to students. feel comfortable with what you do and believe in you, basically.
And I would add, because all those things are true, but I would definitely add that at the end of the day, it's your execution. It's the way that you're speaking on the instrument that
Yeah.
that makes all the difference. Like if you're just caught up in X, Y, or Z, you know, arpeggios or tapping, or I mean, again, I'm not picking on technique. I think technique is the better your technique is. If you can do other things, you're limitless.
It's needed.
You
I mean,
you
you
mentioned
need technique.
yeah I mentioned Frank Gambale. You had mentioned Pat Metheny. You know, Mike Stern. Like these guys have control of all of these things. But at the end of the day, that's the important thing is that when you go to play, like I always think when I used to teach guitar lessons, which I did for a very, very long time, you know, I would be with a student and I would be saying, okay, so let's jam a little bit. Let's see where you are with things. And they would do something like, for instance, a bend. And the bend would go down like lead boots. It'd be terrible, right? They'd bend and it sounds like they're killing a cat. Or a vibrato or something like that. And then they get in their head and they get all freaked out and then they don't want to do it.
Exactly.
So the thing is, you've got to be confident with those, and I hate to use the word master, but those things that you find important that you want to develop, you've got to be able to add them and implement them in a way that when it comes time to play, your execution feels like music. It feels real. Like, you know, you're not thinking, oh well, I like Pat Metheny, but you know, the execution of Neil Schon from Journey, you know, because you listen to them all and go, well, that's right. That fits. There's Carlos Santana doing what Carlos Santana does. So
Yeah.
it doesn't matter whether it's fast or slow or high or low or rock or blues. No matter what it is, it comes down, in my opinion, it comes down to the execution. So when you play, somebody listens to you and goes, yep, there it is. That's
Absolutely. And you know, I can't agree more. You know, it's and we all have something to say, definitely. You know, and our own like sensibility and musical taste is always going to come out, you know. And so yeah, I can't agree more. Absolutely.
that's
You know, we all have a voice, and that's one of the things that we, you know, uh, a lot of people, a lot of great players I've heard saying, you know, at the end of the day, you have to find your own voice and find your own way of you know, doing things. Maybe it's a you know, like a position or like, you know, a fingering that, you know, might not work. So yeah, you got to work your way around it, and at the end of the day, that's going to stick with you much more than if you learn something from somebody else. That's why, you know, I think great teachers always say, you know, this is the way I do it. You know, I present it this way,
right.
but it's not the only way to do
That's
things.
right.
You know, you see if that works for you, and if not, just find your way around
Yep,
it.
find a
And
way that works. Yep,
exactly,
that's what it is.
absolutely,
Cool.
yeah,
Well,
yeah.
thank you so much, Luca, for your time. I'm not going to keep you here forever, but it was awesome talking to you and certainly get to know you a little bit better. This is great.
My pleasure, Steve. Yeah, yeah. And again, you know, it's been an incredible ride. You know, working with Guitar Zoom, and yeah, I hope we can keep doing awesome work.
Yeah.
And you know, all of the people who want to join Academy, I strongly recommend it because you know, I think we're building a great team. You know, we're all like-minded people, and you know, willing to help whoever wants to join. So yeah, for the people listening out, please check out Guitar Zoom Academy and you know, sign up.
Yeah, absolutely. So, for those of you that might not know Academy, what we've done at guitarzoom.com is we've started having these instructors now that you can actually study with. That's what Academy is that you can study with these instructors instead of just, you know, getting a guitar course and going through it. You can actually have someone who is there to help you build your path and help you achieve your goals. That's what Academy's all about. And Luca is one of the instructors for that just does an amazing job. So yeah, like he said, please check it out. You can go to guitarzoom.com and there'll be a link wherever it is you're seeing this or watching this. There'll be a link for that too. But you can check it out. You can get a hold of Luca and you know, sign up with him and do some studying. So thank you, Luca, for your time. I sure do appreciate that, buddy.
My pleasure, Steve. It's always a pleasure talking to you.
All right. Take care.
Thanks for everybody who's listening as well.
Thank you for watching this video. If you're enjoying this video and you'd like to support the channel so we can continue to bring you more free content, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications and let me know what you think in the comments below. Also, if you'd like more in-depth training and courses, go to guitarzoom.com and get started for free today.